In the process, most of the outer covering of the moon, that's its topsoil and everything else which would have enabled life to continue on it, was ripped off it and rained down on the Earth. Again, the effects of the disaster would have been very, very much the same as in the previous two cases. At the moment, we have no evidence which enables us to select any one of those three in preference to the two others. All we know is that the date for all three is exactly the same. The results, as far as the Earth was concerned, were exactly the same, but we are not quite certain as yet as to the precise cause.
Plato and some other sources say that the destruction of Atlantis happened in one day and one night. Do you agree with this theory?
I have nothing against it. I read in a scientific journal the other day that the process of turning a star into a nova takes approximately 3 seconds, and that is a disaster on a far vaster scale than Atlantis. If you accept that the disaster was caused by some piece of cosmic material falling into the sea, then the catastrophe would have been almost instantaneous. In other words, it would have taken place within 24 hours. Now, the story of the flood in Genesis refers to 40 days and 40 nights. But the storms that would have arisen after the destruction of Atlantis would have lasted at least 40 days and 40 nights before they quietened down.
The only problem I see with this theory is that one day wouldn't leave enough time for the survivors to escape and diffuse throughout the whole world, like they say that they diffused in Africa and in the American continent, and that's how we know about it. So how do you explain our knowledge and the survivors who gave us this knowledge?
The answer to that, I think, is quite straightforward. The survivors were the people who had some idea of what was happening and took precautions in advance. In other words, at the time of the disaster, Atlantis was engulfed, and the number of survivors from the whole continent was probably not more than a couple of hundred. But in the preceding weeks or months, during which time it became fairly obvious that there was going to be a natural catastrophe of a major nature, tens of thousands of people poured away into Africa, into Europe, into North America and South America. And those were the survivors whose stories have come down to us by now. But people who were actually on the island when the disaster occurred, I say, if a couple of hundred got away, well, I think they were extremely fortunate. My own personal impression, nobody did. The disaster was too great.
How do you think that the approaching catastrophe was known before it actually happened in one moment?
The signs were fairly obvious as to anybody knowing the slightest thing about astronomy. Don't forget, we were dealing with a catastrophe which was imminent. In other words, within a question of months or something like that, and which was not at a distance of millions of light years. I should imagine that whichever was the cause of the three that I've given, that the court astrologers were pretty well able to forecast the exact date on which it would happen, would say at least 6 months, perhaps further than that, in advance. It would be very difficult not to realize that something was happening from the heavens, because the pattern of the heavens would be changed. You would see lights in the sky which you didn't have before. You would have thunderstorms. You would have all kinds of unpleasant things happening as forewarnings of the disaster to come.
So, according to this, the flood was the result of the sinking of Atlantis.
The immediate cause of the flood was simply this. A meteorite, as I said before, probably a couple of miles, possibly larger in diameter, plunged into the sea at a great speed and from a height of several thousand miles. The shock was enormous, but the splash was terrific. Probably 10,000 cubic miles of water were shot into the air in about a fifth of a second. Well, this water had to go somewhere. And as it was shot in all directions, a lot of it shot across South America, other splashes reached as far as Europe, and the resulting flood went right round the world, in my opinion, and lasted for the 40 days and 40 nights as set down by Noah. I may say Noah's flood story may be prejudiced in some things, but as a factual newspaper account of an unpleasant event, it's extremely good.
It may very well be that, buoyed up by the scientific theories, is Noah's Ark itself, to say nothing of our boat of Okosaki. Princess Marta de Ruspoli, speaking in Tangier, Morocco, has followed the Ark's voyage not only through the pages of Egyptian mythology, but virtually over the muddy back of the Atlas Mountains to its final resting place.
If there was a huge flood, this flood, according to the Egyptian texts, was a tidal wave. The tidal wave was probably brought about by the enormous earthquakes that took place. Well, this tidal wave was called Aatep in Egyptian hieroglyphs. The wicked back of Aatep was certainly the waves of the tidal wave. The survivors of Atlantis fled in whatever boats they could find. And among these boats, there was certainly a big boat. That boat was the ancestor of the boat of the sun. It was the boat that left Amentet, the sunken island, going towards the continent, where it was swept towards the continent by the tidal wave. Well, when the ark of the Egyptians, the boat of Keper, it is called by the Egyptians, that is the boat of the creator. Keper means to create in Egyptian. Keper. And this boat was flung on and grounded on a staircase. That is the Egyptian legend. So I said to myself, this staircase probably has left some traces somewhere, because it must have been a very big staircase. Well, I succeeded in convincing some friends to go with me and have a look and see whether we could find the staircase on Mount Serwa. Well, that was very much of an expedition, because Mount Serwa is extremely wild and difficult to get at. In the first place, it's snowed up for many months a year, and the snow hardly perhaps melts in the summer. It's over 3,500 meters high, and it is completely wild. It's a kind of no man's land as far as civilization is concerned. But I felt that if I didn't get a proof, all my theories were no good. So I succeeded in getting there. I got there with friends. We had great difficulties. There had been floods. The roads were swept away. There were stones. We had to abandon the car. It was a Land Rover that was supposed to go over all sorts of tracks, But even so, it became impossible, and most of the time we had to walk.